Hey everybody, today's podcast features Dan Viens. Dan Viens is the host of the Seahawks Forever podcast. It's honestly my favorite Seahawks podcast. And while having Dan Viens on to talk about the Seahawks would have been great, what I thought would also be interesting is having him on to talk about his alma mater, the Washington State Cougars, a team that he's rooted for a long time and does not talk about that often, except for you'll catch him on X. By the way, started calling it X today. I don't know why. They finally got me. I've been saying Twitter. I've been defiant. Finally, they got me to say X. I'm going back to Twitter. I'm going to try. He's, very knowledgeable. And I think like a fan who's pretty grounded and understands the kind of implications of why the Apple Cup is going to change and how it is, by the way, in some ways, very much the fault of the Washington Huskies and their brass. And why, in some ways, it was out of their control and they kind of had no choice but to make the move to the Big Ten. So Dan and I had a really cool conversation. We ended up talking, by the way, for like longer than the podcast itself, after about a million other things, life, the Seahawks, down to like audio equipment for podcasting. But right here, you're going to hear us talk about the Apple Cup, the future of the Apple Cup, and how he would feel as a Cougars fan with some specific changes that may occur over the next couple of years as the game approaches its next phase and contract. All right, Dan Viens, we're here to talk about, you typically talk about the Seahawks on a essentially daily basis at this point. You talk about the Seahawks, and today I wanted to talk to you about maybe your first football love, or at least your closest football love, or your least nurtured football love at this point, the Washington State Cougars. Yeah. Obviously, they played the Huskies in the Apple Cup, and you and I are on different sides of that rivalry. But that rivalry has taken a lot different shape in the last couple of years. How are you feeling right now as a fan of one of the two remaining Pac-12 teams at the moment?
Yeah, it's not as bad as it's been in the past, and maybe that kind of is one of the layers that we'll end up talking about here. Like, I even tweeted out the morning of the game on Saturday, like, it just didn't feel the same. It was just hard for me to get as excited about the rivalry anymore. Part of that is they're not in the same conference anymore, and it just doesn't impact, the pathway for each team. It's also earlier in the year. That's weird. Apple Cups should be played with snow on the ground in Pullman and like sunny, really cold days in Seattle. And it should mean something, towards bowls and things like that. But it's also just the inequity now in college football. I mean, that's really what I felt waking up Friday or Saturday. And part of that was earlier in the week, this ranking that came out showing the operating budgets of football programs in the country, and just the disparity is absolutely out of control. It's worse than it's ever been. It's always been that way for the Cougs. We've always been the underfunded school and not had the donor base that UW did. And it was always more challenging to compete. And that's why it's basically a 3-1 historical, favor. It favors UW. It just kind of felt sort of defeated before the game even started. Like the days of waking up thinking, hey, we can get him this year. I like the matchup. Just those seem to be over. And then, through 3 quarters, they're within a score and they had a shot, and I thought they were much more competitive than I expected. And then you saw, what happened in the fourth quarter, but we've seen games like that before. Like, I think part of it was coming off the horrible performance we had the week before against North Texas, for crying out loud. I genuinely thought the Huskies were going to score 80 points on us. So small moral victory, perhaps. Go Cougs, that we only gave up 56 or whatever it was. Yeah, I lost track.
Yeah, but, I had to say, I sent you a message after you tweeted that, because I had the same feeling on the other side, and I'm also like, it's the rivalry is less fun from a Huskies perspective, also because of, like, I know we're the bad guy in this. There's no version of this where, and I'm also, by the way, I'm one of these Huskies fans. I didn't go to Washington. I'm one of the worst type of college football fans, but
okay.
the Huskies are the evil empire in this, right? There's nothing defensible. Before it was like at least this perception of equality. They're both Pac-12 teams, and a lot of the fans, I think, still are regionally in this area, but the players even less now are regionally from this area. And it seemed like when Jake Dickert left, that was like the last chance. Because obviously, I mean, we're talking about last year, the Cougars beat the Huskies, but because of the way college football is now, Jake Dickert leaves, the entire talent base follows him, or John Mateer goes to Oklahoma. And it's a completely different team, and it's completely irrelevant to 2025 that the 2024 Cougars beat the Huskies, because it's a whole different team, whole different coaching staff.
Irrelevant. Yeah. You couldn't even look at past history. 74 new players on this roster. And I know that the Huskies, hit the portal pretty hard this offseason too, but not to the tune of 74 players. And it's really unfortunate for all the programs. I've gotten to see it from a couple different sides, because a lot of those players that came in, a lot of the new players came with Jimmy Rogers from South Dakota State. I feel terrible for those guys. Like, their fan base, they just won a national championship 2 years ago, and then to see their coach leave and take 30 of his players, I think of those 74 were from there, 29, something like that. In one sense, it allows a new coach to build his program a little quicker. But you're kind of robbing from, every other program. Where I'm staying currently in West Virginia, we're seeing an example that here too. We drove out to Huntington. It's about half an hour away last week, and watched Marshall play a home game. I was really excited about that. The whole We Are Marshall thing. Same thing. They had a successful year last year. They won 10 games. Their head coach leaves for a better job, takes like 40 of their players with them. And so they have 60 or 70 new players.
Didn't they skip their bowl game because they didn't have enough players?
They're one of, several teams have had to do that. And that's just a bummer. It's, at the end of the day, like, it might sound like sour grapes, for me. And I did get, I got plenty of that kind of reaction to my tweet on Saturday. Like,
sure.
Stop whining, baby, put your big boy pants on, whatever. It's like, if you can't see from a UW perspective, how it's bad for college football as a whole, and you can still feel that way and still feel really good about the fact that you're in the Big Ten now, and you got Ohio State coming in this weekend, and how cool that is, and you're on national TV, and you have this huge operating budget. You can feel both things, but the tribalism that is, sports these days and sports fandom prevents that in some people's minds. But it's just, I was happy that we were competitive. I thought the onside kick call was absolutely despicable. Clearly, Jimmy Rogers doesn't understand Apple Cup history, because that's happened before. I think Bill Doba did that one of his years, where we were a massive underdog. We were playing better than expected. They get a score. Exact same scenario, trying to onside kick. It's not successful. And then it was just the floodgates open after that.
Yeah.
But I still feel like as we move forward, it's going to get uglier. And I honestly think we're headed towards some form, however long the timeline is, 3, 4, 5 years from now, where you essentially just have one super conference that competes for national titles. And then all the other conferences will make up the rest of the teams outside the top, however many you want to pick, 32 or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably right. And we'll get maybe further into that in a moment. I had the same feeling as you, that I thought the game wasn't going to be super competitive. And I thought you and I were going to be having a different conversation, because I guess maybe what I underestimated is, even though these teams are kind of like a band of mercenaries to a degree, there still are some guys on these teams who probably played high school football against each other. There's still some regional pride, and these guys still do want to go out and win. And so, like, I was really happy for the Cougars to really give them a game, because I think it'll make it exciting the next 2 years. The game's going to go on for the next 2 years at least. It'll be the season opener next year, which, I mean, you want to talk about bizarre. It not being the day after, or the Saturday after Thanksgiving, was bizarre enough. To have it be the season opener is going to be completely bizarre. But I will say, I think you made a good point about the being able to have kind of both things in your mind at once, which is, Would I, in a perfect world, if I could draw it up and I don't have to consider any other implications, would I like the Pac-12 to still be one of the Power 5 conferences? This game still matters from a conference perspective and nothing changes? Absolutely. Sign me up for that right now. That's not the reality, right? And if I had to pick between two evils, one is Washington loses a bunch of funding and becomes an irrelevant program to the national championship conversation, or they join the Big Ten and it's this kind of like, I still am having a hard time understanding the history of the Big Ten and caring about some of these in-conference, not really rivals, like they mean nothing to me. I would pick the one where Washington remains nationally relevant, but I'm also very sad that these other games mean less. This game in particular means less than it used to.
Yeah, I've stopped, ripping on Washington for the decision they made. I think it was, given the context of the moment, it was the only decision that made sense. And I think any practical, reasonable person, no matter who your loyalties are, would agree with that. It's USC's the bad guy in this whole thing. They're really the ones that spearheaded the whole thing and didn't communicate properly with the rest of the conference and let them know what was going on. And the biggest villain, of course, are the last two commissioners that allowed all this to even happen. But I don't blame UW anymore. It sucked, and it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with it, because I did think there was a glimmer of hope there. I did believe, and this might just me being generally an optimistic, glass half full, silver lining person. I thought the Apple deal was really creative and forward thinking, and at some point someone's going to do that, and I think it would have worked. And in some ways, the way it was structured, put more money in Washington's pocket earlier than they're going to get with partial shares out of the Big Ten. Now, that being said, I mentioned that list that came out earlier this week, and Washington was third overall in football operating budget in all of college football, third behind Texas and Alabama. That's hard to compete with, because the WSU operating budget for their entire athletics department, all sports, is $85 million. The Huskies football budget is $87.5 million. And WSU is also cutting that overall budget by about $10 million over the next two seasons. So it's only going to get worse, even with these new NIL rules that make you have to go through a clearinghouse for all these deals outside of the department and caps the amount that you're allowed to use from your operating budget. When your operating budget's that big, 22% of it's pretty damn good. And that gives the Huskies about $20 million to spend just on NIL, not including what individual donors can also provide. Whereas WSU's NIL budget for all sports is $4.5 million. UW's football NIL budget's $20 million. So that's tough.
So college football just got rid of the spring transfer portal. Did you see that?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, so from a scholastic perspective, I understand why they need the winter one, but from a bowl game perspective, to me, one of the worst blemishes on the NIL era is these situations where Marshall's not playing a bowl game because, and of course, I guess the other part of this is, by the way, if you have a late season coaching change, or if you have a late in the process coaching change, that might even set that program back even worse the next year. I think it's inevitably there's going to be some talent issues for that team, but now without the spring and by the way, the transfer portals are going to create problems no matter where they are. It seemed to me like the one to get rid of was the winter one, and maybe that's tell me why I'm wrong, because nobody seems to feel the way that I do.
No, I think you might be onto something there. They've got to do something about the bowl game thing. The Cougars experienced that last year. They had a bunch of guys after Dickert took the Wake Forest job that didn't play in that game, and then Kyle McCord ends up playing for Syracuse, and it throws 20 touchdown passes or whatever it is, and they took the bowl game seriously, and some teams aren't. They still have some work to do in trying to dial that in. I still can't quite wrap my head around why they eliminated the old rule that you can only transfer once without having to sit out They just got rid of that. And I think that kind of played into this whole Wild West thing where, you see these guys that play 7 or 8 years in college football because they bounce around and play for 4 or 5 different programs.
Yeah.
And use all their red shirts and everything else. It'll be interesting to see how that works out, I think. But the spring one, I think, is important because that's when teams are built, and that's when I think that impacts maybe a little bit more the quality of the product you're going to see in the fall. I mean, teams are getting rid of the spring game now and not even holding them anymore because they don't have enough players, because the spring games in a lot of cases were coming before that next transfer portal, and they just didn't have enough bodies. And I think there's something kind of, maybe I'm a romantic, but there's something about spring football that's really unique and kind of cool and gives you a little bit of a glimpse as to what the team might look like. And so we'll see. You know how the NCAA is managed these days. If enough coaches don't like it after a year or two, they'll change it again.
So to go more Apple Cup specific, it's over. The present contract is over in 2 years. I was happy at the time that they extended it by 5 years. In a perfect world, again, I could see being very happy that the game continued from a tradition perspective. But as the conferences keep expanding and there's more conference games and less out of conference games, the obvious question is for and I want to hear it from your perspective as a Washington State fan also. But I look at it and I go, if one of your games has to be Washington State, and Washington State now is not a prestige win. It means something in this region, but to CFP voters, it means nothing. And in fact, it's like, I think that Washington State plays up to the Huskies every year. They play better than, I think, like you said, there's this massive disparity in budget and often in NFL talent. And nonetheless, Washington State comes to play every year. So it's this constant landmine for Washington every year that if they win it, they gain nothing. If they lose it, it looks like a really bad non-conference loss to an unranked opponent in most years. I don't see the incentive for Washington outside of keeping the tradition alive, which I do not mind. That does not bother me. But out from just like a financial or program prestige standpoint, it seems like more of a problem than a virtue at this point.
I think the motivation for UW continuing it, I think it makes all the sense in the world for WSU, especially once they settle into their new Pac-12, where they're not throwing together this hodgepodge roster where you're playing, you're having to take Ole Miss on the road and you're having to go play Virginia and play Oregon State twice. The dumbest thing I think I've ever seen. I just reminded myself of that as I was looking over the schedule today. So it makes all the sense in the world for them, because I do think there's an opportunity here, and we can talk about this in a minute, for Jimmy Rogers to kind of get WSU back to what they used to be, which is, underfunded, kind of the underdog all the time, but get some stability there in the coaching staff. He's probably not going to be poached for a couple of years. He'll get a chance to build his program. There's 55 freshmen on this roster. That's over half the roster is made up of freshmen. And, these guys aren't 5 stars, and so they're not, getting poached by other teams. From Washington's perspective, I see your point that maybe it's you can easily look at it as you can only lose in this situation. You can't win if you beat them 50-0 because you're the bully. And if you get upset, well, it's the sky is falling. But I think money's part of this, right? And if you know that every other year you've got WSU coming to your stadium, even if you're ranked first in the country and WSU's coming in 0-3 or 4 or 5, whatever week they play, Husky Stadium's still going to be full of 70,000 fans, because Husky fans love watching. They don't care. They love watching their Huskies beat up on the Cougs, and enough Coug fans. 60% of Coug graduates, WSU graduates, live in King County, so they're still going to want to go to the game, even if there's no chance to win. That's one full stadium guaranteed, every 2 years.
Well, that's kind of the problem too, I guess.
It makes some sense for them.
If you were starting from scratch and you're Washington and you're building the schedule, at some point you'd be like, well, of course we're not going to Martin Stadium. Are you crazy? Like, no, we'll bring that quality of program we would bring here. And I would love nothing more. It actually is kind of liberating, because my sister went to Washington State. I've As you get older, you like just the rivalry isn't as strong. I don't care that much. I wouldn't have cared that much as much as I did 10 years ago, regardless of what the state of the Pac-12 was, because I'm, I guess, older and have less testosterone in my body is probably the reason, right? Like I
resemble that remark.
But it is kind of, I would love if Washington State became like the Boise State, or like how Gonzaga is to basketball, of this region of college football in Washington State, because then you could have two teams to root for. It would be like conflict free. But again, like, I still think you run that risk of like, and also, by the way, 70,000 fans every other year. Could you get 35,000 fans every year for UC Davis or whatever horrible program? Like, that's obviously worse than Washington State, but like, it's just hard for me to pencil it out economically in my mind. Would Washington State, or you be, if it was technically a neutral site game, but obviously if you put it in Lumen Field, it's a different, is that too much of a slap in the face to the rivalry in your opinion? Obviously they did that a couple years ago, but is that long-term too much of a slap in the face?
I do think that's, these next round of negotiations, if there are any, is going to be fascinating, because I think that played a part in it. I don't think UW wants to go to Pullman ever.
Right.
And so I think from their side, they'll probably try to suggest something like that. Like we saw it with this contract the first year. Last year was at Lumen Field, and then it's going to alternate for the next 4, and then we'll have to see what comes next. I could see them suggesting something where it's like a 3-year rotation, right? Mm-hmm. Or it's like Lumen, UW, and then Martin Stadium. In which case, at that point, I wouldn't blame the Cougs for walking away from that. I thought it was a cool atmosphere last year, and maybe I'm biased because we won and we got to see John Mateer, who's going to win the Heisman this year and be a first-round draft pick and all that, and that was really cool. I guess I'll answer it this way. I would rather the game be every year at Lumen Field than go away.
Okay, I can live with that.